How's it going? Welcome to another episode of the Rain Race podcast. For the first time in a few weeks, we have been away. Trying to remember the date. I think it's been about 3 weeks this time. A little bit going on. Just came back from a vacation that started on August 1st, and pretty much ended with me going to the IMSA race at Road America. We're going to be talking about that in a couple of minutes here. And then just a couple of other things, but to be expected, I guess, at this point. Joined alongside, as always, by Racing Nation TV, Kyle Cuthbertson.
What up? We've all been busy. You've
Yes,
been busy.
yeah.
Funny enough, this is like the first time I've gotten to talk to you in 2 weeks because I went to Mooresville to cover
Right.
go-kart racing, and then I went to Nashville. Spent like 2 days at home last week. I lost the little USB connector to my mouse. I lost a pair of flip-flops, but other than that, I'm doing well. Got to see a lot of fast things. That's what it's all about.
Well, that's good. And other things that are slightly new. For the first time on this podcast, am doing this from not my basement, because you may have remembered from other podcasts that my basement was just a hopeless cause in terms of radon and me not being able to do these quite as often as I wanted to because of things that are out of my control. Moved the entire setup to my bedroom at the end of July. As a result, I'm on a wireless connection now, so it's over Wi-Fi, not wired, because I don't have any place to put an Ethernet connection in my bedroom. So I'm hoping that the live stream aspect of this goes perfectly fine, but it's just something to keep in mind because it's the first time I'm doing it here. As
The
always,
fight against radon continues.
yes. Well, I think at this point I can call myself a winner because,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're not going to attack me up here. Let's just say that. As always, if you're new here, first of all, thank you for tuning in. You can leave your comments or questions in the live chat, and we will try to get to as many of those as we can. Especially as we get to some of the more discussion-based stuff later on in the episode. But sorry. First of all, first thing I want to talk about was the IMSA race at Road America. As I said, I was there. Actually, been to the last 3 out of the 4 IMSA races, including the last 2. I guess in between the last podcast and this one would have been when I went to Lime Rock as well. Unfortunately, that race didn't quite go too far in terms of it ending pretty much an hour early and not too much happening. So maybe a blessing that we didn't really have to talk about that one too much. But at Road America, there actually were quite a few talking points to go over.
First, let me interrupt you
Go ahead.
as usual. My
Yes.
bad. The real questions here. First time I rode America. Number one, what did you think? And number two, did you have a bratwurst? Because I'm going to kill you if the answer is not what I want here.
Well, to answer your second question first, the answer to that one's no, I did not.
Oh, you messed up.
I know.
You really messed up.
Well, I'll tell you what.
What was the one thing I told you to do when you went to Road America?
Well, listen, I was trying to be strategic about. I don't even remember you telling me to do that. But I was trying to be strategic in some way possible. Because first of all, I wasn't even really that hungry because of the oh so generous breakfast that I got at the hotel. But second of all, I was like, all right, Road America. This is Wisconsin. We're big on cheese, so I got to get something with like cheese.
Did you even get cheese?
I got a grilled cheese, Kyle, of course.
Did you get that at the track?
Yeah.
You have to get the bratwurst at Road America.
Well,
I
it's
know.
too late now.
I know Wisconsin's a cheese thing. In some of the plate like the places at Road America have cheese curds, and like that's the move. But it's hard to find the right stand with the cheese curds. I understand that, but like when you're at Road America, you have to get the bratwurst. And if you want to go even further than a bratwurst, get the double brat, where it's basically when they split a bratwurst in half and put it on like a hamburger bun, and you get a bratwurst sandwich. Yeah, you messed up. That is the Road America, the pinnacle of Road America.
Well,
that is it.
I'll tell you what. I'm pretty sure my dad got a bratwurst, so you can.
Your dad's smarter than you are.
Yeah.
Learning things.
We'll go with that. And
But what do you think of Road America as a whole?
I thought it was good. For
How many places did you explore?
Quite a few. And the thing is, I explored all of them on foot because for some reason they like allow infield parking, but they don't explicitly allow it, and that's not something I learned until after our car was pretty much boxed in. So basically, when we got to the gate, we said, "Do you guys offer infield parking?" Because that's what I usually would do at Watkins Glen. They say, "Yeah, we have infield parking. It's $50 whatever dollars. Pay that. There you go. They give you a pass, and there you're all set." Road America, we asked, "Do you have infield parking?" And they basically looked at us and said, "We don't know what you're talking about." So I was like, "Okay, I guess they don't." They explained they have a tram system. They have like three, I don't know, golf carts, or they're really just the yeah, they're really just the what am I looking for here? The outdoor like woods things. What's the brand of those? I forget.
I don't know what the brand of that is.
Like Polaris. Yeah, it's a Polaris. And
Yeah.
they have those
Then
with
they
like
have the things behind them, like you
right,
would, the
right.
type of things where, like, imagine for the viewers, imagine like getting like a tour around like Daytona National Speedway, and they have like all the like, seats. It's like golf cart seats, but it's being pulled by either a car or a Polaris.
Yeah. So they had three of those going around the track, but you kind of had to wait for those. And I was like, I'm not going to go wait. And then they do an entire lap around. So by the time I even got to where I wanted to be, it was kind of going to be a waste of my time. So I spent a lot of the day just walking around the entire track. According to my Fitbit, I did like 24,000 steps that day. It's pretty nice. But, my issue with Watkins Glen, and keep in mind when I go to these races, I'm like and you would know this, Kyle, because you were with me at Watkins Glen. I'm very like camera focused in terms of trying to get good photos. Not so much at Watkins Glen, because by the time I was there, I was my fourth day with you. On race day, that was my fourth day being there. I was kind of tired of it. But at Road America, I was kind of just going around trying to find all the good spots. I had one day to do it. So I skipped the grid walk. Number one, because the grid walks are just really hectic this year, especially because I feel like people, having not been able to do the grid walks for like a year and a half, are just more inclined to do them now than ever. So I learned at Lime Rock that it's kind of not even worth my time, because I can do it once, see all the cars, and then, all right, I did a grid walk. I don't need to do this every single race. So during that, I just kind of walked around the track and tried to find some good spots. But they do give you pretty solid access there. No complaints. And the food was good. And actually, another thing I noticed is the food was pretty reasonably well, no.
It's reasonable.
It's reasonable, but there was another place. What am I thinking of then? Oh, never mind. I'm thinking of something completely different. I was going to say the food was completely reasonably priced, but I'm thinking of something different, so ignore that. But it was okay. It wasn't excessive.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. When I go to Road America for a couple of days, like I'll make my bratwurst trek like once, right? Like I have to do it. You have to do it once.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
I'm not gonna spend that money like every day.
Well, how much are they charging for that? Because I didn't even bother to look.
I don't even remember. It was more than I remembered it when I went this year.
Oh.
That's all I remember.
Yeah, well. Anyway, the race itself started out with, the weekend was looking like Mazda might be the top manufacturer there in terms of speed. I believe they got a BOP break before the race, give them a little bit more speed. But it ended up being pretty much the 31 Action Express Whelen Engineering Cadillac that had pace most of the day, and they ended up winning the race, basically reclaiming the lead in the final 2 or 3 laps. I think there were around 3 minutes left in the race, 3 or 4 minutes, when they reclaimed the lead from the Meyer-Shank Racing Acura, due to Meyer-Shank being on a separate fuel strategy. Looked like they were really trying their best to save towards the end of the race. They were running considerably slower lap times, but Road America is a very long track, 4 miles, so I think once they realized that they weren't going to be able to hit that target, they were sort of just straight out of luck and had to bring it into the pits. Perhaps they were banking on a yellow towards the end of the race, but didn't quite go in their favor. And still, unfortunately, the only team that has not picked up a win in the prototype ranks this season. So it was the 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac that picked up the win, followed by the 55 Mazda and the 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac. Mazda had a bit of a run-in with the 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura with about 25-ish minutes to go, I believe. That ended up resulting in the Wayne Taylor Racing Acura having a tire go down. I can't remember which one it was. I want to say it was the left rear. Could have been, yeah, I believe it was the left rear. Had to make an unscheduled pit stop to replace that tire. And as a result, they finished in fourth. Couldn't find them on the results page. So yeah, I just want to briefly go over the other classes, especially GTLM, which is I think probably where the second or perhaps the greatest storyline for that race came from. But in LMP2, it was the 18 Era Motorsport Orica taking the LMP2 class win, followed by the number 8 Tower Motorsport Orica and the 52 PR1 Mathiasen Orica. I don't even know why I keep bothering to mention the manufacturer name in LMP2. Yeah. For that and LMP3, it's basically useless. So let's just move on to LMP3 and say it's another win for the 54 Core Autosport entry of John Bennett and Colin Braun, followed by the 38 Performance Tech Motorsports car and the 74 Riley Motorsports Ligier, with Ligier covering all the cars in that class. GTLM, this is perhaps, like I said, the most interesting class from that race. From a strategy perspective, you had the 79 WeatherTech Racing Porsche able to pull off that two-stop strategy, with Corvette trying to split the strategy. I think they had the 3 car was really trying to go for the 3-stop strategy, and the 4 car was trying, I believe, the 2-stop. Could have paid off for the number 4 car, but unfortunately on their final pit stop, they ended up spinning the wheels on the jacks. It was Tommy Milner in the car at the time and got a penalty for that, dropped them further down the ranks. One thing I heard, or I guess read after the race from, I believe it was Matty Campbell in the WeatherTech Racing Porsche that won the race, is that the Corvettes were really struggling for tire wear in that race. I don't know if that was track conditions or something along the lines of a BOP update that sort of influenced that. But I haven't heard them struggling necessarily in other races in terms of tire wear. So I was a little bit interested to hear about that, especially at Road America, which you'd think tire wear is usually an issue at tracks like Lime Rock. And, Lime Rock, I didn't really hear about any issues with them there, especially Lime Rock was a hotter day, having been to both races. I was a little bit surprised to hear about that. And I'm curious where it's going to bring them in future races, because that's ultimately, I think, why the 3 car ended up going for that 3-stop strategy, just because they were trying to be a little bit more aggressive on the tires, and it didn't really pay off for them in the end. The 79 car was saving fuel a little bit at the end, but they had a pretty significant cushion to play with, so it wasn't really anything dramatic for them to finish, and pulled off that upset victory, technically at their home track, because WeatherTech is based in Wisconsin, I believe down near Chicago. So top 3 in that class, only 3 in that class, was the 79, followed by the 3 and the number 4 Corvette, rounding off GTLM in 3rd. Finally, GTD, it was a Porsche win in GTLM and GTD, with Zachary Robichon and Lawrence Vantor bringing the Pfaff Motorsports number 9 Porsche to a win in that class, followed by the 96 Turner Motorsport BMW, still running a very, very, I guess, successful season for that car. The 96 has been up front in pretty much the majority of IMSA races this season in the GTD class. And another Porsche rounding out the podium in that class with the Wright Motorsports number 16 Porsche. Looking at the championship, and this is where Kyle, see, you're going to yell at me. I didn't have it pulled up, but I do now. It is, let's see, this is why IMSA gives us a very long list of championship results, 17 pages to look through. But it's the number 10 Konica Minolta Wayne Taylor Racing Acura, still at the top with 2,380 points, followed by the 31 Action Express Cadillac at 2,339, and the 55 Mazda is still third at 2,337. I'm not really going to go down every single class in the championship, because I feel like I'm doing this pretty much every race anyways, and there's a lot we want to talk about with IndyCar. So that is the top three right now in the championship ranks for the DPI category. And I'll be updating that as we get into the later parts of the season, because pretty much now we are into the second half of the season for the IMSA WeatherTech Championship. So we'll be updating all those races as they come to us, and take it one race at a time, I guess. Anyway, I mentioned IndyCar. Kyle, while I was at Road America, you were at another or a race of your own, I guess, the Music City Grand Prix, the first running of that race down in Nashville, Tennessee. And what a race that ended up being. I think it's, as I said in the description of this podcast on YouTube, pretty much what a lot of people were expecting in terms of carnage. And I'd love to hear some of your opinions, starting from the beginning of the weekend, even at some of the stuff that went down at that race.
Yeah, overall the weekend, I mean, the event was incredible. I've never seen anything like it at an IndyCar race for sure. Just given how close it was to the actual downtown of Nashville, and just the amount of people and how much Nashville right now is just booming, and there's just people everywhere at all times. Yeah, the TV rating definitely showed how big of a market Nashville is right now. And overall, obviously, in the first year of the event, there were some bugs. There were some things that they need to improve on next year, and but ultimately, I think being there, the things at the track that need to be fixed aren't you know necessarily things that are gonna hopefully things that aren't gonna deter people to only making that a 1 year event, a one and done deal where they won't come back next year. The one big problem of the weekend was there was a grandstand exiting the bridge that wasn't completed until Sunday, and people paid like $300 for tickets to sit in those seats on Friday and Saturday, and obviously they weren't able to do that for 2 out of the 3 days. But I've heard a lot of those people were comped, sweet. They were given a refund, sweet passes, or moved to a different grandstand. Just there's a lot of things given for those people, and yeah, the grandstands were actually completed by Sunday, and the people who had tickets to that seat were able to sit there on Sunday, which is ultimately, the best thing to come of that. And there are some other horror stories from other street races like Baltimore where they had to delay practice for the track not even being built. And given we didn't have anything like that, I think it was pretty much a success. And knowing that the promoters of the event, they already have knowledge that they're not going to be profiting until at least the third year of the event. I think we'll at least get a few more years of this event. And there was nothing really first year damage wise, I think, that would deter this from going away, which is for IndyCar street courses is a good thing. As far as the race goes, I'll be interested to hear.
Before you get to the race, I want to ask you one question, because I saw some people online that were saying that race felt like the largest race attendance wise for IndyCar outside of the Indy 500. You go to a handful of IndyCar races every single season. Kind of want to get your 2 cents on that one.
Man, I don't know about that. I mean, it's weird because the whole place was just packed, right? But when you think about like the size of the circuit and where you were, like it was pretty large. But I mean, you go to somewhere, any other race where maybe well, I mean, it might have been, because when I think about the numbers wise, they were expecting 100,000 people at this event, and I mean, I don't know if that's over the weekend or one day, but I would say at least there were 60,000. I mean, on Sunday, and that. So I mean, as far as the area goes, I think it could have been one of those things where it was just a lot of people in a smaller area, and that made it look a lot more packed. But I mean, there were a lot of people there. Um, the grandstands there were bigger than any other street race I've been to. Grandstands were actually absolutely huge, especially the ones by the bridge going into turn number 9. Yeah, there were just people everywhere, and yeah, concerts going on every night. and there was a huge area for where the concerts were that was usually full of people. But yeah, I mean, like obviously because where Nissan Stadium's at is across the like a river from where actual Nashville is. So the only way to get from downtown Nashville to where the circuit was a pedestrian bridge, um, which wasn't the largest, and that was almost always packed. Um, so I think that also equates to it's a smaller area, and logistically it was very difficult. I will say, as far as my personal experience at the event, uh, the street races, like St. Pete's, one of my favorites. I would say that one that kind of gave me uh, a good, you know, a good kind of entryway into going to street races. But I mean, Nashville logistically, like you park in downtown Nashville and you have to walk like 4 or 5 blocks in downtown with all these people, and then cross the pedestrian bridge, and then you're finally in the track, and then getting anywhere on the track is kind of rough, and it's definitely logistically not the most convenient way to go to a race. But yeah, I think it was probably just a smaller area. But I mean, there were a lot of people.
Well, so another thing I noticed was, and I don't know if this is true, but I saw that paddock access was like $1,500, and they were, I mean, they must have been selling it as part of a bigger package where it's more of a VIP based thing where you get to go in all of these different experience centers and whatnot. Um, I know you were sort of working media that weekend, so you were kind of in the paddock regardless. But I'm trying to figure out if that was actually true, because one of the things that I think IndyCar tries to sell themselves on, um, I guess in comparison to say NASCAR, would be that they're a little bit more, I'll say quite a bit more friendly in terms of the access that they give the fans, in terms of how close they can get to the drivers, how close they can get to the cars in the paddock area. And if that's the case, I think that that would be a little bit of, not really a concern, but a little bit of a downer. Just because if it is one of the highest attendance races outside of the Indy 500, I think that that's something you would try to capitalize on in terms of getting a lot of long-term fans when you can just give them a whole lot of access into the races and make it something that they want to travel far to go to additional races for. I don't know if that was true or not, but um, I guess just a couple of your words on how many people ended up being in the paddock that weekend, because that's just something I had seen online. I didn't see anything on the contrary though.
Yeah, I don't think it was $1,500. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, if paddock passes were more expensive for the Nashville race, I do think it would be because of the paddock at this race, in particular being it was laid out a little awkwardly, and I would say that if you made a paddock pass like really cheap or even free like IMSA does, uh, that if you got too many people in there, it could become a problem. Um, so I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it was that expensive. I would say I would bet that it'd be more expensive than any other IndyCar race though. But just given the sheer size of the paddock, I mean, yeah, it could be possible.
Right. So going on to the race itself, you're about to get into that, and there's a lot to talk about starting from lap one of that race. Um, so I guess I'll just leave that to you. I covered a lot of the IMSA race. If you want to just give a rundown on everything that was going on with IndyCar there, from the drop of the green flag.
Yeah, I mean, throughout the weekend, the obvious favorite and the fastest car in the field was Colton Herta. In qualifying, probably the highlight of the weekend was in qualifying in group number one when, so the fastest lap time of the week so far would have been in like the 15s, maybe 16s, and Colton Herta on black primary tires went out there in like group one and put down like a 14.3 or 5 on black tires, which was just astronomical. And he was the only driver in the Fast Six on Reds to hit the 13 second mark. And it's just, it was one of the most impressive qualifying performances that I've ever seen in any IndyCar race I've ever been to. So obviously he was the favorite going into it. But at Nashville, the starting line on the track was entering turn number 9, the exiting portion of the bridge, and we all thought there was going to be a big old wreck and there wasn't. and the first yellow happened to be on lap one for Dalton Kellett. Um, just the car shut off, I believe. He was struggling with mechanical issues all weekend. I believe in the first session, he had to replace the entire like wiring loom on the car. It was insane and expensive for him. Um, but so I think the big so the reason I bring up Dalton being the first yellow to me is this was a race that had a lot of yellow flag laps. There were 9 yellows, 33 laps of yellow flag, which on paper is not good. There was, and then I think coming to the green might have been the next one, might have been a little later, but it's Sebastian Bourdais and Marcus Ericsson. They're all trying to time the start because the restarts were happening where the actual finish line was, and the back of the grid was, well far behind the final corner on the track. And uh, when everyone, when someone decides to go and the person ahead of you doesn't, because you can't really judge when the restart's happening, Marcus Ericsson literally ramped off the back of Sebastian Bourdais, goes vertical, and then that delays the yellow. I don't think they officially went green on that. So then there's another yellow. And then on the next green flag attempt, Will Power does a thing and goes inside of Pagenaud, getting a little aggressive, and puts Pagenaud in the wall. And given that it's such a narrow circuit, it creates a pile up that then creates a red flag. Again, not good. And then I believe we finally got a green flag run in for a little bit, and then VK hit the wall, another yellow, and then, I mean, it was just basically it felt like for a little bit there was just a theme of things of, right when we went green, we'd go right back to yellow, and it was just not. I would say, I mean, the fans at the track were still, I mean, there were a lot of people angry with how long the yellows were taking, but at the same time, I feel like they were still into it, into the race, and excited about what was happening on track. But somewhere in all these yellows, Marcus Ericsson, who went vertical early in the race, took the lead. Because when you have that much of the race in yellow, people pit under the yellow, things get organized, unorganized, and just all over the place. And then let's just go straight to the final, I want to say 30 laps of the race. They finally go. Finally, we get a green flag run in. And it's Marcus Ericsson leading and Colton Herta in second. Again, Herta, the fastest guy on the track, just running down Marcus Ericsson. And we set up a battle finally with green flag running going. We set up a battle of Ericsson versus Herta. And with 5 laps to go, Colton Herta missteps a little bit, locks up the brakes and hits the wall, which was yet again another yellow, which IndyCar then did the thing where they threw a red flag. And keep in mind that for no reason, for a reason, there is a reason, I'll get into that, but this race started at 4:30 Central Time, 5:30 Eastern, and it's like at this point, if all these yellows, it's getting dark, the race is already toxic, the race might end because of the sunlight, and we have a red flag and like a 2-lap shoot to the green. Marcus Ericsson leads both laps, unsurprisingly, and wins the race. He goes from vertical to winning the race. And I mean, there's a lot to unpack from this race. There's a lot to talk about. You can discuss, whether or not it's the track's fault, whether the drivers were just being dumb, what could be changed with the layout of the track, the procedures. There was another thing in the middle of the race where after VK wrecked in turn 1, the leaders pit, and when they came out of the pits, the pace car was like just going through the turn 1 and 2 chicane, which meant that everyone that pit, I think Colton lost like 3 spots. When he blended out of the pits, he came out 4th ahead of the rest of the field, and the guys behind him, weren't far behind. So I mean, there was a unicorn situation where you went into the pits and you didn't go to the rear automatically because the field didn't fully go by. That's another controversial subject. So I mean, there's so much to unpack. Chris, I don't know how much of the race you saw, but I'm pretty sure you saw everyone going nuts on Twitter, um, and I would imagine that you have an opinion on this race.
Well, yeah. So that race started pretty much right as I was pulling out of Road America. I was lucky enough that the rental car we had was equipped with Sirius XM, so I could listen to IndyCar radio on the go without having to pull up the app and use data. So yeah, the majority of that race I was listening on radio because I didn't want to stream the entire thing on my phone, especially because most of the race felt like it was under yellow or red flag. Just seems like it would be a pitiful waste of my phone's data plan. But from the parts that I were able to catch and parts that I certainly was able to hear over the radio, it sounded like the restarts were a big issue. And what I wanted to sort of prioritize on this podcast episode was talking about what easy improvements they can make to the race. I mean, I've seen people just show these entire new layouts for, okay, we can have a Nashville street circuit and have it look like this. I think that the setup they have fundamentally works in the way that, it's certainly an interesting track layout, and I don't think it's completely cursed, as some people online would say. But I think that there are improvements that can be made, improvements that aren't even difficult. For one, I would make the restart zone basically how they were starting the race every time, or not every time, but how they started the race at the drop of the green flag. And I could be wrong in that, but from what I was able to hear, it sounded like the restarts were a majority of the issue, with cars just getting stacked up towards the middle of the field. So I think that that's something that could be looked into. There are also some awkward corners, I think is the best way for me to describe it. The section that made sort of the least sense to me, I guess, was, as Kyle and I have called it, the poor man's Baku castle section going up near the condominiums or whatever they have over there. I just don't even really see why that's necessary, because it's not really adding anything. And if anything, if you have a track block there, you're sort of straight out of luck in terms of anybody even being able to get by. So maybe that's something you could look into removing. The bridge as well, I think, had added a ton of character in terms of how bumpy it was, but it's almost, at a certain point it still looked like we were running at Sebring. And let me just say, there's a reason why IndyCar doesn't go to Sebring.
Corday said in the media bullpen, he told us that it was bumpier than Sebring.
Yeah, I mean, I would believe it too, especially with the way the IndyCar suspensions are set up. I'm not an insider on exactly how stiff the suspension on those cars are, but I'm assuming that they're set up stiffer than a sports car prototype would even be, especially one that's set up for a 12-hour endurance race at Sebring. You could see that cars were getting upset towards the end of the bridge section more than the beginning. I'm guessing that's just because they were at a higher speed then. So I'm thinking that there's something, they could try to find a way to smooth off that transition to the bridge potentially. The track itself did feel pretty narrow at some points, which really was hurting the chance for drivers to pass. And I think that was really emphasized at the end, when everybody thought that Colton Herta was basically just going to have the wheels to pass Ericsson and sort of just pull away with an easy win. But you were able to see, sort of like F1 at Monaco style, that Ericsson was able to just hold him off despite probably not being the faster car overall, to the point where Herta was struggling so much to the point where he even crashed. So, it's a street circuit. You have a lot of limitations in terms of how you can actually make the track wider. And I don't think that there's necessarily anything they can do on that front, but I do think it's something to keep note of, because to me, the strongest passing zones the entire weekend were at either end of the bridge at the very end, where you had that hard braking zone. But the problem with that is that you also had the really abrasive, transition off of the bridge where the cars would get upset. So any chance you had at overtaking were sort of minimized by that. Actually, Colton Herta ended up nearly crashing into the wall himself, just trying to pass Ericsson one of the, a few laps prior to when he actually crashed on the run back. I don't know what corner it was going into, what corner number that would be, but on the turn 9 on the second pass of the bridge, heading back towards the start finish line. nearly sent it into the wall there. I think when he was trying to set up a pass, or maybe he just got caught a little bit off guard. Um, but overall, you know, I will say there are things they have to improve because, I think there was a lot of hype built up for this race, especially with the track layout, sort of looking similar to Baku in terms of how it had long straights and really tight sections in between. The F1 races at Baku are usually pretty exciting, with an exception of a couple of years. And I think that's what a lot of people are basing their hype around. To me, it didn't really live up to that hype, and I think that there are things they can try to do to modify the track surface for future seasons, to maybe make it a little bit more interesting. But I mean, that's just my opinions on it. I'm curious to hear how you would, the arguments you would make similar to mine, being actually at the track and seeing the entire weekend live in front of your own eyes. Um, so I guess if you have a couple of opinions on what they could potentially do to make it better in future seasons, I'm open ears.
Yeah, I mean, you're obviously, as you said, you're limited in what you can do. And I think being in a major city like Nashville, if you look at the layout, they really minimized the amount of roads that they had to shut down, and I think they did a really good job at that. And like they closed off one bridge, and then the other, like on across the river that's not Nissan Stadium, that Baku section probably shut down like like a block and a half, like, and then you shut down like two or three roads on the other side, and then the rest of it's just the parking lot of Nissan Stadium and roads closest to the stadium that aren't really used that much as far as I know. So I mean, they did a great job in just minimizing the amount of roads that need to be shut down, which logistically helps the event and helps making it happen. Now, I think as you go further, you might be able to, convince uh, the city to let you maybe use a little bit more to maybe try and get a few more roads maybe on the other side where the Baku section is, so that you can create more passing zones. Because ultimately, my only complaint with the track, I mean I don't really have any complaints about how narrow it is. I just the one thing you need to add is a low speed passing zone. The only real passing zones on this track are just high speed at the end of the straightaway. You need somewhere that's low speed that you can pass. You have that 1 and 2 chicane, can't really pass there, it's too narrow. The Baku section, you can't pass there, it's way too narrow. And then the rest of it's just straightaway going up and down the bridge. So I think that's the only track improvement I would make. I mean, honestly, over the weekend, I fell in love with this track because it's narrow, it's bumpy. There are some sections that need to be worked on. In fact, on Friday to Saturday, they did smooth over some bumps, transitioning from the off the bridge in both sections. But I mean that I just there's something about this track that going over the bridge and just like the sweeping right, high speed, kind of full load, and then like that left hander for nine, you're going full load, banked because it's like a highway, and then you're going left into nine. I think that's a really awesome section. Probably my favorite of the track. The 1 and 2 chicane pretty much has to be there because that's the corner right before you're going onto the bridge, which obviously on the runoff of that right-hander, there's cars going the opposite way, so which means you can't really create runoff, and if you have them going too fast at that could be a problem. So the tight chicane has to stay. There are some things that I noticed when I did a track walk like that that are just things on the track that have to be there for reasons. They have purpose. Now, as far as the racing goes, the thing that this event I think cannot like just it would be ridiculous if it doesn't happen next year. Like this is what I think has to happen next year. We have to just full on just move the finish line to the before turn 9. Make turn 9 turn 1, and let's just finish the race there, restart the race there like we started the race there. Because when we started the race there, I noticed the only yellow we had was Dalton Kellett, the car shutting off. It wasn't, contact. They made it clean for most of the lap until Dalton Kelt's car shut off. And then we try to restart the race where the finish line was, where half the field is still behind the final corner on the track, and you have guys like Will Power who see that corner as a way to take advantage and make positions, and accidents happen. I mean, I mean, at the end of the day, too, with this race, when you judge this race, I mean, is that the track's fault? Kind of, but I mean, could Will Power have not been a moron? Yes. But I mean, either way, if you restart the race on the bridge, the whole field has time to spread out. They have time to get in line, and ultimately, when the leader goes, everyone will go because you won't be, behind a 90-degree left-hander. And I think that will just clean it up a little bit, and definitely make it so that, because the problem with this race obviously was just the constant yellow flags coming to restarts and zero green flag laps. Because with a track like this, and this is kind of what I see the beauty in, is, I mean, this is a tricky track. Even if you do what I say, and we change the restart zone, it's not gonna, produce a green flag race start to finish. This track is tricky enough to where, there's gonna be guys that make mistakes and accidents are gonna happen. And honestly, I ask myself, it's just like, do we want a track that's easy for the drivers and doesn't test their limits? And do we want a track that drivers can just easily get around, or do we want something that the drivers have to be on their toes every lap to not make a mistake and cost themselves the race? I mean, and I enjoy the fact that this is a really tricky track. My comparison of it, I think it's kind of a mixture between Baku and Macau. It's got just kind of some awkward sections that are really narrow, and some just sections you look at before cars are on a track, and you're just like, how are they going to do this? And then when you see them pulling it off, it's just incredible. So I mean, I honestly, this turned into one of my favorite tracks. Honestly, as far as layout goes, I want to drive this track on iRacing like right now. It looks super challenging and super fun. But yeah, there are just a few things that they need to work out.
Well, so the entire time you've been going over that, I've been looking at just a straight up satellite image, Google Maps over the entire area. And you're able to see why they're so limited in terms of working with what they can do on this specific circuit. I mean, ultimately, what they had for some parts of the track was one road basically that they'd section off half of it, and the cars would go one way on one side of the half and then the other way on the other side. And I think that that's making it a little bit too narrow for these types of cars to race properly. I'd be interested to see how Formula E cars would race at a track like this. I think that they would race much better than IndyCar did, quite frankly. But I mean, it's hard to say how much they can even go into modifying the track, because obviously then you're getting into what the city allows you to do, and a city like Nashville, I'm sure it's going to be pretty difficult to even make many modifications to the track, and I'm sure they had to make compromises when they were coming up with the original layout. One thing that I wish they would have been able to change is to utilize the parking lot section a little bit more. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that parking lot was also being used as the paddock, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so they wouldn't really be able to cut too far into it. But I'm looking at tracks like St. Petersburg, where they have a parking lot section there, and it sort of just fits in perfectly. Where if you didn't know it was a parking lot, you wouldn't really know, because they sort of just smoothed it in perfectly into the track layout. I know you mentioned a couple of times that the turn 1 and 2 chicane was awkward at best, and the issue I have with it is that it almost feels like it's taking away passing opportunities rather
Well,
than
it had to
adding
be
them.
there, like I said. Can
Yeah,
you see? Because
yes,
if you had them, because there is a way for them to go straight there through that, but then you're just asking them to take the 90-degree right, going onto the
right.
bridge at full speed, and there's not really a runoff there.
Yeah, so I understand why it has to be there. I wish that the parking lot wasn't quite. I wish it was more open, I guess is what I'm trying to
Hmm.
say. If you
Yeah,
look at a
because the
satellite
other thing I
image,
noticed is like where that chicane is, like the width of that is because on either side of the walls there's curb there.
Yeah.
for the parking lot. So
Right.
it's really as wide as the curb is there, and they really had no choice.
If that parking lot was just a straight up paved, completely 100% parking lot, they would have a lot more freedom in terms of what they could make that chicane, and I think they could do a lot better job than what they have. Right now, I think it's too narrow and even a little bit too not what's the word I'm looking for? It's a little bit too short, I guess. I'm trying to think of a better word um, to to describe that. But yeah, I would love to see if they could have a little bit more flexibility there, but unfortunately, that comes up to the stadium itself and the owners of the stadium. So I don't think they have as much flexibility there as they would have hoped for. But we'll have to see what they're able to come up with for future seasons. I'd be surprised if they don't make any modifications at all, because I think that there was a lot of criticism from this race, especially with the amount of hype that was given to it beforehand. So I'll be curious to see what they do. A couple of comments that I wanted to get to. Taurus was saying earlier that if they restart on the back straight, I'm guessing he's talking about right off of the bridge, the accordion will work itself out by the time they get to the tight section. I think, yeah, that's pretty much mirroring what Kyle and I were saying. And then he also said with how little green flag time there was, we didn't get to see tire and fuel strategy get to come into play. So don't forget that. That is an important thing to consider as well. You know, at the end of the race, Marcus Ericsson was on those red tires, and I think the commentary team was talking a little bit about whether or not those tires would last towards the end of the race. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but Herta was on the black tires, correct? At the end of the race?
I believe so.
I want to say he was on the black tires. And yeah, that the issue with the race, another issue with the race, I guess, is cautions breed cautions. It's said a lot of times, especially in oval racing, but it applies here equally. When we actually got a long run in at the end, I think that, we had a great battle shaping up between Ericsson and Herta. Unfortunately, it didn't seem like Herta was really able to present many passing opportunities. But I think that, the potential was maybe there to have something interesting. And, the end of the race was actually relatively clean as well in terms of cars not driving into each other for once. But yeah, I mean, in a different scenario, maybe that race would have played out completely differently if it had run more green right from the drop of the green flag at the start. But I guess we'll have to wait for future seasons to see that one. And then one more thing. Oops, sorry, I just bumped my desk. One more thing I wanted to talk about on this race, because Kyla, you were there, and maybe you'd be able to enlighten me. Would they be able to run that race at night? I'm just throwing it up there, and so did Gam Wilfers, and I'm curious if that would even be possible.
Yeah, of course they would, because it'd be a thing, obviously, because
Right.
to do that at a street race, you'd have to bring in a bunch of lights from outside, a bunch of United Rentals equipment things. But I mean, on the bridge, which is probably the hardest part to light up, you would you have like probably like 10 feet between the actual bridge wall and the wall of the track, so you could put lights there and you could light the place up. It would be pretty kick-ass. And like the downtown Nashville scene is so bumping that, I mean, having a race would not be a noise complaint. It would be fine. So I mean, you could do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think if all else fails, that could be something to definitely shake up that race. I know a lot of people look at Cleveland when that was a night race in 2003. People are saying, why can't IndyCar do a street race at night? It's been a thing I've seen requested
It
a
would be
lot of
one of the
times.
coolest things. SRO did a night race at Nashville. That was cool.
Yeah, I
On
mean they have
Saturday.
they have headlights, so I mean that's a
That
kind of a
was
different
cool though.
argument. But
But I mean, a race did happen at night.
yeah,
Is the other thing about that too.
right. Um, but yeah, I mean I don't think I have that much else to talk about with Nashville. Obviously, they need to make some changes. I think a lot of people have been saying that. Most people have been saying that. It's just a question of what they're going to be able to pull off with that many restrictions on how they can actually modify the track. And I think Robin Miller summed it up perfectly in a sentence where he said that it was the right band, it was just the wrong song. I believe that's the headline that he put out on Racer.com, which I think summed up that race in particular pretty perfectly. Anyway, if you have no other points, Kyle, I want to jump back to just some news, because before the IMSA race at Road America, they had the annual State of the Series address where they discuss everything that they're doing for the upcoming season. Obviously, one of the things that was discussed there was next year's schedule, and unfortunately, there isn't really a whole lot to cover in terms of the schedule for next season. A couple of minor changes. I guess the biggest thing would be that they're planning on a return of Canadian Tire Motorsports Park, which is fantastic. It's been off the schedule since, well, I guess starting in 2020, off the schedule this year as well due to travel restrictions, and we're hoping that it'll make a return next season. Because it's definitely one of the most anticipated tracks, I think, for IMSA in terms of how high speed it is, especially with the prototypes. So it'd be great to have the return of that track. Not a whole lot else to talk about, though, for the schedule. I think it's largely the same, and I've sort of voiced a complaint with IMSA about keeping a really conservative approach in terms of what they're doing with their races. I wouldn't even care if they don't go to more tracks, but I think that there is a lot of room in there for them to play around with the lengths of some of these races, just to sort of make some changes, add some storylines. Particularly, I know a lot of people have been saying, how come Road America isn't a 4-hour race like it used to be in the ALMS days, where it's sort of a hybrid sprint/endurance race, sort of in the middle, right at 4 hours, in between 6 hours and, well, I guess 6 hours and 2 hours if you want to get technical. A lot of people have been saying, can we get a 4-hour race at Road America again? That's not quite the case. VIR and Lime Rock are still GT-only races. I can go on about that for hours. I don't think it's going to be as big of a problem next year, hopefully, with the addition of GTD Pro and the entries that are being discussed for that class. I'll get to that in a couple minutes as well. But, just something to make the schedule a little bit more interesting than it's been, because the last track addition we had was Mid-Ohio. I believe that was 2018 that they re-added that track to the schedule. And, we just haven't seen anything really newsworthy in terms of adding new IMSA races to new locations. I'd love to see them do a race at, say, Portland as well. I think that the Northwest is an unrepresented market for IMSA. I would love to see them try to tap into some of those unexplored markets. Especially because some of those tracks are tracks that ALMS and Grand Am had gone to back a little bit more years ago. So yeah, that's one of the things that came out of the State of the Series. Another thing that was talked about is what will be happening because NBC Sports Network is going under at the end of the season. I know IndyCar already had their announcement on what they're doing with that, with the majority of races going over to Network NBC and a couple of them being streaming only on Peacock. I don't know if you remember this, Kyle, but were any of the IndyCar races being mentioned to be put on USA Network?
Yes.
Okay.
I do believe.
Okay, because the USA Network is going to be the new, I guess, primary home of IMSA races, with the addition of Peacock streaming for a couple of races as well, just like IndyCar, and NBC sort of filling in a couple of gaps for, I assume, a couple of races of the season. The only thing they said definitively with NBC so far, Network NBC, is that the start and end of the Rolex 24 will be on Network NBC, which is great. But it looks like USA Network will be handling the majority of IMSA races for starting next season. One thing I would like to see is definitely more live IMSA races. It's sad that I'm looking back and trying to remember the last time we had a live IMSA race on Network TV. I believe it was actually Belle Isle, right after, or I guess it was sort of in the middle of the IndyCar weekend there. It was right after, actually, the Saturday IndyCar race this year, when that race went long due to all the issues they had there. And I'm trying to think. I think that was the last time that it was live because Watkins Glen was not live on TV. Lime Rock wasn't live. Actually, the second Watkins Glen race, I believe, the sprint race, I think was live on NBCSN. Don't quote me on that, but I think that one actually was. Road America was on a tape delay as well, though. So I would definitely like to see NBC try to step it up a little bit more. I think IMSA has a lot of negotiating power there due to being owned by NASCAR. And obviously NASCAR is a huge partner with NBC. And I think that they could definitely try to work something in there because I think right now IMSA isn't really doing any favors for itself and NBC isn't really helping them out by putting a lot of races live on NBC Sports Gold, which, you know, I'd be curious to see how many people are actually tuning into the races live on there, but I bet it's far less than the amount of people that are just using a VPN and looking at it on IMSA TV. So I'd love to see more live races. In fact, the majority of races should be live for IMSA, even if it's on a cable channel starting in 2022 would be my hope. Other things that were announced, I guess briefly discussed, is GTD Pro and the, I guess, regular GTD class as we know it now as a Pro-Am class. Looks like GTD Pro and GTD, I want to say GTD Am, just GTD, will be very similar, pretty much identical in terms of pace and balance of performance going into each weekend next year. I was initially trying to think if that was a good or a bad idea. Because usually you'd think, well, you want the pro cars to sort of have a little bit of an advantage so that they're not stuck battling, the Pro-Am class as it would be. But the more I think about it, I think that it's actually not necessarily a bad idea. The manufacturers were certainly lobbying for it so they didn't have to have two different specifications of cars going into the weekends. And, you know, when you look at other series, this 24 Hours of Spa just happened a couple of weeks ago. They have multiple GT3 classes in that race. They have the Pro, the Pro-Am, I think Silver, and then just Am, I believe are the four classes in that race. All GT3 cars, and it wasn't really an issue there. So I, sort of hope that the Pro drivers and the All-Pro lineups would sort of just naturally find themselves at the front of the field there. And if not, we have the potential for some interesting storylines in terms of little shakeups going on between the Pro and the Pro-Am cars. Anyway, I briefly mentioned that there is more developments coming in with GTD Pro in terms of who's going to be running in that class. Turner Motorsport right now looks like they could potentially be running a couple of entries in GTD Pro. I believe they just bought 4 of the new M4 GT3 cars. And BMW as a manufacturer has outright said that they plan on running cars in GTD Pro. Porsche as well looks like they're going to be represented in GTD Pro at the Rolex. I'm forgetting the team name here. I'm doing a terrible job. I don't know if you remember that, Kyle, but there was a team that said they wanted to run the Rolex 24. Here's me scrambling to find it. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. Anyway, with Porsche. Additionally, there is a rumor going around that FAF will be joining GTD Pro with an all-factory Porsche lineup. That has been reported from Sportscar 365 saying that that is likely to be the case. K-Pax as well with the Lamborghini program. They have confirmed discussions in terms of doing a program with that car, with the Lamborghini Huracan GT3 in the GTD Pro class. I think the number I saw thrown around was in the realm of 8 to 10 cars in that class potentially, which would certainly be a step up from the 3 that we have this year. And that would definitely be a welcome change, especially at those GT only races, such as Lime Rock and VIR. And the team I was looking for running Daytona was KCMG. I thought it was KCMG, just wanted to make sure before I opened my mouth on it. They have outright said that they're planning a GTD Pro effort for the Rolex 24, which I think is great because one of the things that I guess we haven't discussed too much is the potential for GTD Pro to open up the potential to have these sort of near factory GT3 entries running one-offs at the Rolex, similar to what we saw a couple of years ago with the LMP2 cars, where you had United come over and we had Jackie Chan DC / Joda come over with a couple of Oricas. I think the potential for that is very strong, and I'd be very interested to see how many one-offs we have, maybe at just Daytona, but also potentially in the greater scheme of things in the Endurance Championship as a whole. I wonder if a couple of manufacturers will step up and run those races. But yeah, I think overall, I was skeptical on GTD Pro for a little while because we hadn't been hearing a whole lot in terms of manufacturer / team interest. It seems like in the past couple of weeks, a lot has been popping up, and it's a great thing to see. Final thing, well, maybe not final, but one of the other things I want to talk about with sports car racing is that it looks like we are all but confirmed now, or at least pretty likely to be happening in terms of a Lamborghini LMDH effort, which would be the third LMDH manufacturer from the Volkswagen Group stable alongside Audi and Porsche. That was reported, I believe, first by Racer and followed up by Daily Sports Car and Graham Goodwin. That car obviously is expected to be similar to the other VW Group cars, where you have the Multimatic chassis and the twin-turbo, I believe it's a 4-liter V8, sort of based off what you'd find in the Porsche Cayenne, the Lamborghini Urus, and I believe it's the Audi Q7 SUV, all share that same twin-turbo 4-liter V8. So I actually plan on making a video about that because I think a lot of people need to control their expectations when it comes to what we can expect from Lamborghini and Porsche and Audi. I know when Lamborghini was announced, people were saying, oh, this is great. They're going to drop a V12 or a V10 into the back of that, the Huracan V10, and just have all that crazy Lamborghini styling that we all love. I think that the expectations need to be controlled there. I think what you can expect, certainly, as I said, is that twin-turbo V8 and a little bit of Lamborghini styling. But obviously, it being LMDH, you're not going to be able to see the same level of freedom as the Le Mans hypercar manufacturers have been able to show, particularly Peugeot as a heavy, or definitely an eye-turn, as we discussed in the last episode, in terms of what they did with their car. With the LMDH formula, you're not going to have that level of freedom, or at least you're not going to have anywhere near that level of freedom in terms of what you're able to do with the car, because you're having to base it off an LMP2 chassis. So I think people need to control their expectations a little bit. I'm certainly very excited that we have Lamborghini joining. I think the more manufacturers, the merrier, even if the cars may not be as interesting as, say, the LMP1 cars once were, where you had all that technical freedom. But, beggars can't be choosers, I guess. And I made a tweet on the way home from Road America, sort of just throwing out a number of cars we can expect to see at Le Mans, or even at Daytona now, because ever since our last episode, they actually confirmed that the Le Mans hypercars will be eligible to run in IMSA starting in 2023. So at Le Mans in 2024, I made a tweet that we could have anywhere in the realm of 18 to 22 factory cars on the grid. Obviously that number could be quite a bit more. It could be quite a bit less, depending on how many manufacturers are actually on the grid in 2024. A couple of those manufacturers are still rumored, like Cadillac and like Lamborghini. Alpine as well, heard some rumblings that they are going to be stepping up to a full-time proper Le Mans hypercar in the future. But nothing really anywhere beyond that right now. Just some rumblings for now, but we could hear some more news about that as we go in towards Le Mans in a couple of weeks' time. Anyway, the number that I came up with was around 18 to 22, with Acura / Honda and BMWs being really in the maybe category for Le Mans, because neither of them have really said anything, they really seem IMSA focused for now, and I'd be curious to see if they step up to the plate for Le Mans. Anyway, there's a couple of chat messages that came in while I was going on the whole spiel there. Gamble for saying they need to bring back endurance to Laguna. I agree. That's another thing that they were doing back in the ALMS days. Back when that was actually, it was the season finale race for a couple of seasons, actually happening after Petit Le Mans. And yeah, I certainly would love to see sort of those 4-hour intermediate races. I think could just shake things up a little bit. IMSA needs to go back to Mexico too, because North America. Yeah, I mean that. Was that when Grand Am went to Mexico? Was that alongside the nationwide series for NASCAR? I'm wondering if anybody knows that, because I know the nationwide series used to go there, and Grand Am certainly did. I'm assuming that if they did, they were probably on that split weekend, because that makes the most logistical sense to me, both being NASCAR sanctioned series. I need somebody to confirm that for me, though. I would say, Montreal as well would be another really cool one. Fun fact, both Grand Am and Nationwide went there as well. I'd love to see that track. I think that track really suits the sports cars quite well. And then Taurus was asking about the Nashville TV rating. I did not actually mention that, but I do want to do it real quickly because I wanted to, and didn't actually remember to do it. But the rating itself, I don't know if I have the number rating, but from Adam Stern on Twitter, it was 1.2 million viewers for the inaugural running, which NBC Sports has said they believe is their largest viewership for an IndyCar race on cable since 1998. I feel like we're seeing that headline quite a few times this year, with IndyCar saying it's their largest viewing since something. But the largest viewing for an IndyCar race on cable since 1998 would certainly be something to be proud of. Maybe a little bit of a curse, though, depending on how many viewers saw that race and decided that that's something they want to tune into for future weeks. But anyway, that's something we were mentioning earlier. Kyle, I've been talking a lot about IMSA. I don't know if you have anything to add on to that.
No.
Okay. Cool. But we do have the 24 hours of Le Mans coming up in under 2 weeks now, which just sort of crept up on us. When I was at Road America, I was hearing Heinta on the PA saying all these cars or some of these cars are being shipped off to Le Mans, and the drivers and teams are going over to Le Mans because the test day is this coming weekend. It sort of just threw me for a surprise, where I was like, yeah, I remember the Le Mans was being run at the end of August, the middle to the end of August, but it sort of just kind of forgot, due to the fact that my brain still says that it's supposed to be happening in June. But usually the week of Le Mans, we get a lot of news every single year, so I'll try to recap that in our post-Le Mans episode, which will be happening in a couple of weeks now. And obviously, my channel being a sports car heavy channel, I'll have not just podcasts, but also videos going up. I plan on having a video for this week and next week as well, just previewing the entire race. So stick around if you're interested in that. Anyway, I guess to wrap up the episode, Kyle, it's been a few weeks since we've been on, and I'm wondering if there's anything new on the IndyCar front for you to discuss in terms of silly season stuff. I know in the last one you went on sort of a really long 30-minute discussion about the IndyCar silly season, really early discussion for it. And I'm wondering if you have any updates in that category.
Nobody knows anything.
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff. Nobody knows anything. The only thing we can pretty much say that's probably going to happen is Hunter Ray is going to be out of a seat, and so is Hinchcliffe. And the 60 car is probably the biggest question mark on who they're going to put in. And possibly Sato isn't going to be in the 30 car next year. Don't know if he's retiring or moving, but with his Honda, partnership, he can drive whatever he wants. So I mean, just gonna see what plays out with that. A couple things, just wait and see how they play out. It's a lot of it's probably the craziest silly season in a long time, and it's just gonna get even crazier. And everyone, nobody knows anything, and it's just pandemonium.
Why would Sato not drive in the 30? Because I believe I remember hearing Bobby Rahal say he definitely wants to keep Sato in the 30 car for future seasons.
Yeah, that's a good question. One that I'm not I can't answer because apparently that 30 car is going to be Jack Harvey's seat. So fun.
Mm. And I guess while you're talking about IndyCar, I'll briefly go over the points. Top 3 or 4 for that as well. Alex Palou still the championship leader after Nashville at 410 points. Scott Dixon is quietly second, and I would like to point that out because Dixon only has 1 win this season. Yet he is still quietly in very well in the championship hunt at 368 points. So there's a little bit of a gap to Palou, but definitely my eyes are still on him, and I don't think you can count him out at all, even with the amount of season we have still left in IndyCar. Pato O'Ward is third, and Joseph Newgarden, who had really a disappointing week at Nashville. I know he was a favorite for a lot of people, being his home race. I know he was saying he wanted to win it. Even pace-wise, it just felt like he wasn't quite there. None of the Penske's actually really seemed to be there for Nashville that weekend. So not really an impressive showing for Newgarden or the rest of Team Penske at Nashville. I think a race they're going to want to forget, but he sits fourth in the points at 335. Very closely followed, I should say, by Marcus Ericsson, the latest race winner, at 331 points. So Marcus Ericsson as well, trying to creep his way up the points championship.
Do you know that Marcus Ericsson has scored the most points out of any driver since Indianapolis?
I did not know that, no. What I did know is that he's tied for the most wins this season.
Yeah, that's also a thing.
It's been really surprising this season how few times we've seen a repeat winner. The only repeat winners we have are Palou, O'Ward, and Ericsson this year. So I've said at the beginning of the season that this is quietly one of, I think, the better IndyCar seasons in recent years, just because it seems like it's anybody's fight. It wasn't like last year where Scott Dixon ran away with like the first 3 or 4 races of the season, and pretty much just never looked back on the championship from there. Yeah, Taras mentioned that Dixon's the only full-time driver at CGR who doesn't have more than 1 win so far.
Wow.
Wait a minute. Oh, okay. No, it's full-time. I was thinking Jimmy Johnson, but yeah, full-time you would be correct. Anyway, if you don't have anything else to mention, I think that's enough to wrap up this episode. Hour and 13 minutes. So thank you all so much for tuning in. I do want to say, as I had mentioned before, that I'm going to try to do more frequent podcasts and videos as we approach Le Mans in just under 2 weeks' time. Now, one thing I do want to say is, as of right now, I'm planning on going back to college campus at the very end of the month / beginning of September. Now, I don't know how that's going to affect the future of the podcast. I would hope that I'm still able to do it in the same way that we are now. But considering I'll be living in a completely different place in college housing, Kyle already knows how unpredictable and how much I can hate that sometimes. So any updates with that, I will update you on the channel and on our social platforms as well. You can join my channel Discord. That's on the channel banner. I update everything in there. I'm in there quite frequently as well, just posting when I'm at a race and some of my photos and stuff like that. It's a cool place to hang out if you want to ask me any questions that aren't on the podcast. And I think, once again, that's enough to wrap up this episode. So, thank you all so much for tuning in. Hope to see you next Tuesday. We'll be recapping the Le Mans test day, IndyCar at Indianapolis, and more. So, hope to see you all then.